Annihilation is a deeply confounding film. It's as ambiguous as it is ambitious, and while I admit the film is not perfect, with some campy dialogue and stilted performances at moments, its emotional core and message are both profound and effective. I knew that I loved this film after my first viewing, although I admit I didn't quite understand it. I've heard many theories as to what it all means. An allegory for cancer or the stages of grief. All the explanations I've heard so far have felt too shallow. I couldn't help but feel that something more was going on. After coming back to it a few times, I've realized that Annihilation isn't so much an allegory as it is an exploration, an examination of identity. There's an ancient Greek story about the ship of Theseus which challenges our concept of identity. Theseus was a mythical king whose ship the people wanted to preserve. Over time, the ship of Theseus began to degrade, so as individual planks of wood began to rot, they would be replaced with a new one, therefore preserving the ship. Here we begin to encounter the problem of persistence of identity. If a single plank were replaced, you would most likely agree that the ship is still the ship of Theseus. 2 planks, 3 planks, on until eventually the entire ship does not have a single original piece left. Is this still the ship of Theseus? If you say no, at what point did it stop being the ship of Theseus? If you say it stops when the first plank is replaced, then what does that say about our own identities? Do you stop being you if you get a haircut or lose a hand or lose some memories? To further complicate things, imagine now that every time a plank is taken away from the ship and replaced, the old plank is set aside until eventually every old plank of wood is used to construct a second ship made entirely of the original planks of wood from the first ship. Is this second ship now considered the real ship of Theseus? If so, at what point did this ship become the real ship of Theseus and the other one stop? Or are there now 2 ships of Theseus? What does Annihilation think about this conundrum? Annihilation's primary theme is that of destruction and transition of identities over time. The bundle of qualities that make you, you, is what we refer to as your identity. Just like the ship of Theseus' identity is tied to qualities such as it belonging to Theseus, its physical design and materials, its prior experiences, so too are our identities tied to factors like our physical bodies, psychology, and relationships. It's a fact about life that these factors are constantly changing. Memories fade, personalities change, relationships degrade, or new relationships form. Even our bodies are made of completely different cells than our bodies a decade ago. Annihilation consistently references the idea that as these factors change, our identities do in fact change with them.
All other lives feel like a lifetime ago. We were kids. I was married. In a way, it's 2 bereavements. My beautiful girl and the person I once was.
As we transition into new people with different identities, our former selves are destroyed.
If I don't reach the lighthouse soon, the person that started this journey won't be the person that ends it.
The film argues that we are programmed to consistently destroy our former identities in a cycle of self-sabotage.
Almost none of us commit suicide, and almost all of us self-destruct. In some way, in some part of our lives. We drink, or we smoke, we destabilize the good job, the happy marriage. But these aren't decisions, they're impulses. Isn't self-destruction coded into us, programmed into each cell?
This cycle of self-destruction is analogous to the life cycle of cells, which also happens to be Lena's area of expertise. All cells eventually self-destruct, but not before copying themselves with slight variations. It's these variations that allow cells to become something new. Often, this process of changing identities in both cells and us is so gradual that we don't recognize it until years later. The shimmer is a place where this process is accelerated and exaggerated. By refracting everything down to the genetic level, every living thing within the shimmer is in constant flux. Plants and animals begin to form hybrids that could have never existed, taking on new identities as their genetics meld together. Similarly, anyone who enters the shimmer is changed in every significant way that is tied to their identity. Initially, our team of scientists begin to lose psychological continuity with their former selves. They can't remember what they did when they first entered the shimmer as their memories degrade.
You don't remember setting up camp, do you?
I don't remember anything.
Mentally, their psychology begins to shift as they witness traumas and have their brain cells begin to literally change.
We are disintegrating. Our bodies as fast as our minds. Can't you feel it? It's like the onset of dementia.
The shimmer begins to feel more like a dream as memories from a past life are refracted and manifest into something similar, but uncanny. It resembles a past life, a past identity that you begin to forget. Just as psychological continuity is destroyed, physiological or bodily continuity is also broken as bodies are physically changed. Skin shifts, internals morph, other life forms' DNA melds with your own. Other more inextricable mixing of identities occurs, such as the tattoo that moves from the arm of the dead soldier to both Lena and Thorensen, or Kane's southern accent we hear before his death.
If you ever get out here, you find Lena.
The longer you spend in the shimmer, the more changes occur that result in you ending up further away from the person you once were. By changing and intermixing the smallest parts of you, the shimmer literally annihilates identity.
Annihilation.
At the center of the shimmer is a strange alien hub that produces featureless entities that can mimic and become any living being they encounter. Similar to how a single stem cell can grow to become any other type of cell, the featureless beings are in search of an identity, a directive of what to become. They are neither good nor bad, but merely desire to exist, which first requires an identity, because without identity, there is no life. When Lena first encounters one of these beings, it is in the center of the pedestal and has already become a copy of Dr. Ventress. We can see the final stages of the transformation just before Lena enters. Perhaps because of Ventress's terminal cancer, the entity realizes it has a better chance of survival by copying Lena's identity instead. It reverts back to its featureless, mutating form,
Annihilation.
destroying its identity as Ventress. Exactly as Lena's description of life at the beginning of the film.
This is a cell. Like all cells, it is born from an existing cell. And by extension, all cells were ultimately born from one cell.
We see it mutate from just a single cell of her blood, essentially becoming an exact copy of her. Kane, faced with this mirroring alien, has an existential crisis and eventually kills himself. Before doing so, Kane asks the question to who we later learn is his clone.
Is that you?
Here we get to the heart of Annihilation's main message about identity. Think back to when Lena was yearning for her husband to return. Who she wanted, Kane, had a particular identity. The Kane we see at the end of the film shares the same body as the one Lena yearns for, but through his experiences, trauma, and mutations from the shimmer,
My flesh moves like liquid. My mind is cut loose.
it is obvious that he is no longer the Kane he once was. Now, standing before him, behind the camera, he's confronted with the Kane he once was. This alien clone literally came from the cells of Kane, and is in fact closer in psyche and memory to the Kane that Lena is yearning for. It's more Kane than the Kane sitting in front of the camera.
I had a life. People call me Cain. But now I'm not so sure.
Like a dying cell giving way to a copy of itself, Kane ends his life. In the film's final moments, Lena is reacquainted with the clone of Kane. She asks,
You aren't Kane. Are you?
and he responds.
I don't think so.
His uncertainty makes us realize who's to really say if he is Kane or not. He's closer to the identity of Kane than the Kane that killed himself. What is it about his origins that disqualifies him from being considered Kane now? We all started out as just a single cell after all, and the cell that this Kane came from shares genetic continuity with the previous Kane. There's no simple way to answer if this is Kane. Kane's eyes have a gray shimmer to them, reminding us of his transition as a clone and highlighting the ambiguity as to his identity. But then, surprisingly, Lena's eyes also shimmer in similar fashion. Does this actually mean this is Lena's clone? Well, definitely not. We clearly see her clone die in the fire before it destroys the shimmer, and the contrasting glasses of water poetically indicate the difference between them. I think something else is going on. Just as Kane isn't sure if he is actually Kane when asked, Lena is not sure if she is actually Lena. Throughout the film, we see a pattern of Lena admitting her ignorance to questions she doesn't have the answer to.
What happened to Josie Radek?
I don't know.
Vetras?
I don't know.
Was it Cartman-based?
I don't know.
Making what?
I don't know.
And what do you know?
When Kane asks her the same question,
Are you Lena?
she's caught off guard when she realizes she can't affirmatively answer that she is Lena. She knows deep down inside that the true answer is yet again.
I don't know.
While she may share much of the same body as the former Lena, through her experiences in the Shimmer she has been both physically and mentally altered, and as her tattoo reminds us, we aren't sure if this Lena is in fact the Lena we knew at the beginning. In essence, they are both like the two different ships of Theseus, both sharing lineage with their former selves, but both being modified in different ways. Unlike the tale of the ship of Theseus, Annihilation is definitive in its affirmation that identity is changed as our underlying qualities are modified. The film's answer to this confounding riddle is that neither of the two ships are the ship of Theseus. No matter how hard the Greek citizens wanted to preserve Theseus's ship, the laws of nature made it a futile endeavor by ensuring the underlying qualities of identity are always in flux. The ship they end up with will never be the exact ship they started with. Initially, Lena too shares this futile desire to fight nature's effective change, wanting life to stay the same.
And take a cell, circumvent the Hayflick limit, could prevent senescence. It means the cell doesn't grow old, it becomes immortal, keeps dividing, doesn't die. Without it, I could keep looking like this forever.
While hers and the Greek citizens' desire for preservation is noble, they're missing the point. What they see as preservation is in fact stagnation, which is antithetical to life itself. What they saw as death was in fact change, which is what must occur for creation of new things.
It was mutating our environment. It was destroying everything.
It wasn't destroying. It was changing everything. It was making something new.
According to Lena, everything came from a single cell.
Every microbe, blade of grass, sea creature, land creature, and human.
But would have never existed if it wasn't for the slight modifications and degradations of that first cell. Without the destruction of old identities, we would never be able to create new ones. We would be trapped with our current selves, robbed of free will to choose our futures. When we learn to embrace this process of annihilation, we realize that nature has provided us a path to reconciliation, improvement, and progress, if only we choose to take it.